Good morning, good evening, Amber, Lief. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
Hello.
Hi.
Let me get rid of the screen. We don't need that anymore. I think we can just be us on the screen because today we are not going to show you slides. We're going to talk a bit about a very, very interesting and hot topic, which is about GenAI, but not generative AI from an AI in general from a technological perspective, but more trying to look at it from what are the projects we've seen, what are the failure and success we've seen in the project we have all been involved in, and trying to figure out what were the reasons for success or failure of those projects, and what's the opportunity for the tech writing teams, the content architects in this opportunity, and what's the role to play to make sure those projects can be successful. So that's to the subject. Unless I'm wrong, am I in the right meeting? Is that okay?
That's what I'm here to talk about.
That's the right one. So maybe to start, Lief, so that we all are on the same page, would you give us a definition of AI and GenAI from your perspective?
Well, Fabrice, you're right. AI is a pretty big and broad spectrum of technologies. And what we're going to be focusing on today in our conversation is on the generative AI tools. So those would be things like your chat GPTs or the image generators even. We're not going to be focusing on the AI technologies such as like machine learning, machine translation, natural language processing, even though those tools or those technologies can have a role in the greater journey of an organization for generative AI solutions. We're really going to be focusing, I think, today with the sort of the latter end of that perspective. So is it generated, and what does that mean for the customers, like so customer facing technologies, as well as author accelerator. So there's a role for generative technology in helping authors be more effective, more efficient in their work. So that's sort of the broad spectrums, the boundaries of what's in scope and out of scope, I think, for our conversation today. Okay. Amber, did you want to maybe talk a little bit about the author accelerators? Because I know that's an interest of yours.
Yes, I'm always interested in helping folks create better content more quickly. And one of my clients actually calls their internal AI initiative authoring accelerators. And I thought it was such a great term because it's not about replacing the author or the subject matter expert. It is about helping them get to past the blank page and to getting to their work more quickly. And this is, there's a lot of opportunity here. And so I just wanted to make sure that we talk about that, as well as that more customer facing experience that most folks seem to be talking about. My thoughts are, it's great to serve them, but if it's good enough for them, why isn't it good enough for us, right?
Oh, that's an interesting perspective, because for us, as you know, Free Topics, we are on the delivery side only, because we are not on the upstream part of the process, which is the content authoring, the content management, which is the realm of the tech writing team and the CCMS, and whether you are GitHub, if you write in Markdown and all those tools, that's not where we are. So we are downstream, we are just taking care of, which is already a huge topic in itself, and then seeing the delivery of that content, making sure that people find the content that they need in a snap, they can read it, they can use that content. And it's true that for us, when we think about GenAI, we mostly think about it from this delivery perspective, which is how can we use AI to change the way people access that content? And I think that's a key point as well, because the project we've seen are mostly on usually led by IT guys at the IT team, or stemming from the board level. It's like the opportunity, I think that at the board level, the opportunity of AI is more like, how can we change the way we engage with our customers, with our users? See what I mean? They don't, I'm sorry to say that, but I'm not sure the board level sees GenAI as an opportunity to change the authoring process. I think they're more, you see what I mean? It's like, maybe they don't really care about that. It's more like, my God, I've seen like, can we do the magic chatbot? It's crazy because the thing I see when I talk out to our customers is like really in each and every company at the board, the higher the paycheck, the pay grade, it's more like, can we do something magic? It's more like the dream of, you know, this Iron Man movie with Jarvis, like the magic assistant that does everything. I think that's mostly what people try to achieve right now, and that's where usually they go to the IT department because it looks like being something technical, and they go to the CIO and the tech team and they say, can you do something like that? Can you do the magic chatbot? You know, not the chatbot from 10 years ago that is not working that well, but it's like, is there an opportunity with GenAI to replace everything we have, almost every touch point that we have with customers, with this one, the magic thing that you can talk to and that tells you in a snap the reply that you need, just that. I think that's what we see. It's crazy how it has reframed or unleashed the imagination of people about what they want. I don't know if you see that as well when you talk to your customers, how they see GenAI, not from the authoring, but really the big picture and the dream they have. Do you see this sort of same dream?
I just read a story recently in a magazine where it was there was an entrepreneur, just like what you were talking about, CEO of an organization. He does consulting, high level consulting, and he charges an enormous amount per hour. But his thought was, I've done thousands of recorded sessions. I would love to have I don't have the time to meet with everybody face to face, as the demand outpaces what I am able to deliver. What if I had an avatar, a virtual me in place who could, these weren't his exact words, but essentially regurgitate all of the information that's in my head, in my webinars, in my recordings, in my PowerPoints, to somebody who were to ask them those questions. So rather than charging a really high amount per hour, I could charge a much lower level, but it's scale. It's a question of scale at that point. And so he's very much in that dream world of, I have this vision. I think this is possible, but the challenge he's going to run into, the reason why we're having this conversation today, at least our thesis, our premise, is that he will fail. He will be able to connect the pipes, the technology will be there, but he is going to fail. His project will fail or not meet his success goals if he doesn't really get a handle on his content, the stuff that he really cares about and that he's put his career into. And that's just an example that applies to every one of these generative AI projects, is that you can connect the pipes, you can generate content, and it might even look pretty good for that question, but have a high failure rate overall. And that is where the content pros really have, the subject matter experts have a lot to offer in leading these projects. Hallucinations are a big challenge. The accuracy of information that is presented, privacy concerns, there are ethics questions that definitely will crop up. So, yeah.
Yeah, my point on this, excuse me, is that, most folks, so let's say that they're going to get the technology all hooked up. Well, first of all, there is challenges with the technology. It's constantly changing, but, IT is used to that. That's their bread and butter. And let's say that you get it all hooked up and you start, trying it out. And the hallucinations are pretty easy to spot. I mean, when it returns something that is so off base, you're like, what? It's easy to spot. The more difficult, and therefore I think of it as more nefarious or more challenging aspect, is when the answer is almost right.
Mm.
But and almost right doesn't meet the end user's needs. It looks good. IT might say, "Oh yeah, it seems right,"
Seems
and
right.
be able to, because content came through, my part of the system's working, and based on some cursory testing, it got some of the basic context right. So therefore, the answer must be right. And if you have ever tried to follow instructions where one step is wrong, almost right is not good enough. This is not quotes, horseshoes, or hand grenades, right? It has to be right every time, and it has to be right all the way through. And then this is our premise that the people who best know the content, who are the domain experts, are the folks who create the content and understand why they created the information, and that the units that they have are purpose driven, and that they would be able to, if they see something, first of all, they'd recognize that it wasn't quite right. And they would be able to understand where the right information, the correct information, really should have been pulled. And that level of understanding is not shared by many other folks in your organization.
Amber, I want to sort of piggyback on that easy to spot the hallucinations. It's easy to spot if you know the answer is wrong. And that is something in a project that I'm involved with. I just experienced just this week, actually. There was somebody who went out to ChatGPT, asked a question. ChatGPT gave a reasonable sounding answer, and that person went to a web forum and was looking for the plugin that ChatGPT insisted existed. That plugin doesn't exist. And the person asked on the web forum and was told the thing you're looking for doesn't exist. And you could do these other things instead. And yet the person insisted, no, you folks, you experts, you subject matter experts must be wrong because ChatGPT told me so.
Good one. Very good one. Oh, now that's interesting. I think we see the same sort of misunderstanding and situation with our customers. We've seen mostly projects that are initially led by the IT team. As you said, probably because the technology, I wouldn't say is immature because it works, but it's pretty new and always changing and not fully readily available to be used by business people. So it has to be done by IT guys assembling different things using libraries like LangChain and all the things. So you need to write in Python and do this thing. And what we've seen is mostly projects that are really led by the IT team. They spend time assembling, choosing some different libraries, components, picking an LLM, blah, blah, blah. And then suddenly that's pretty fun because the startup say, oh, we need content for that. So then suddenly they start collecting content in the company. So you see the IT team, we've seen that. That's a story told by our customers. Like you see the IT team coming and trying to collect content everywhere they can find it. Like, and we've seen those guys like taking a bunch of PDFs somewhere and loading the PDFs into the LLM or whatever the way you do it, depending on how you do it. And then, as you said, initially, it's like once they have loaded this initial set of content they have found, type something and say, oh, it looks good. And it's so amazing when it's just the fact that it replies in whatever language you're using, like English, say, oh my God, looks good. And say, okay, check, we've done it. And then the next day they went back to the C-level guys and said, okay, we've done a project, can you test it? And then usually, exactly as you described, there are some subject matter experts, can be field technicians, can be real users having tough questions, not the simple ones. You see the real complex questions, because the easy one, they know how to do it. So usually when people start looking for info, that's because that's a very, very specific point that they need to check. And then they ask that question and the reply is absolutely nowhere near the truth. I say, well, it's like, oh, it's mixing two products, it's replying with one value that applies to one product and not to the other product. So it's lacking context. You mentioned things that are wrong, but I think something that is even worth is when there's something that is missing, because you have to know the entire content to spot what's missing. Because spotting what is wrong, absolutely wrong, is, as you said, Amber, can be easy. Spotting something that is true but not in the right context is more difficult. And then you have to know the things to spot what is missing from the reply. That can be tricky as well. And that is even trickier to guess, okay, that's the reply, but is something missing here that is essential to making that good, not dangerous, whatever the situation you are in. So what we see is that usually that you have this test phase where this IT team has developed something, put it on the table, people start, so the guys that are not the experts start asking questions, simple questions, it works, oh my God, it's magical. And then it goes to the field technicians, the support agents, the real people that know the product, have the tough question, then they start using it and say, it's not working. And the level of disappointment of those guys is huge at that moment. See what I mean? It's like, you ask me the first question I ask or the second question I ask, it's already a failure. So how do you want us to adapt that? And then suddenly the project, and we've seen projects that have been led by the IT teams like that suddenly were fully rejected. It's almost like this, this disillusion, and it's all like, oh my God, it's never gonna work. So that's where we see as well many companies in this situation where they fail to achieve the promise of what GenAI can do. And I still believe it can be, it works. I mean, we've seen projects where it works. So can you, and I think for me, that's exactly as you said, and maybe we can move on to this next part of the discussion. For me, the key part here is not the technology. It's not about connecting the pipes. It's what flows inside the pipes. It's about the content itself. So I think that's, for me, the failure is not the technology. The failure is the content. I mean,
and the reason people start with technology is because AI is being A, marketed as a technology, and B, technology is tangible. It is a thing. I can hook up things. And the idea of content is much more nebulous. There's, depending on who you ask, what is the meaning of content, right? And who owns it? And in most larger organizations, there are many organizations that create content. And they may or may not be involved or even know about these AI initiatives depending on the size of the project until, as you say, there is a level of disappointment that causes the project managers to regroup and to say, okay, well, we got it hooked up, but, and this is again where I think that the folks who create content have a huge opportunity to add value, and not just folks in traditional tech docs, training, folks who are in service organizations, tech support organizations. People who know the content are the folks who can help this project get, if you're fortunate enough to be asked to the table from the very beginning, yay you. If not, and you're coming in that remediation phase where they're trying to resuscitate the project because it didn't go as expected, and someone got egg on their face, or got embarrassed, like, oh my gosh, we have to fix this. Well, then one of the places where I think that folks have an opportunity is to start off with what content, who are you trying to serve? And again, if you are a professional communicator, this should sound very familiar to you. When you write content, what is the first question you ask? Who am I trying to serve? And so this is where relying on your background and your training is bringing the same skills you've always had and always used, but bringing them to a new context for folks that might not have that focus. And you're going to find allies, for instance, with content strategists, and Lief will elaborate on that, particularly maybe with the marketing folks, because they would have information about the archetypes and personas. And that to me is the first step, because how are you going to test something if you don't even know what context it is and who's going to be using it?
So you mean that part of the process is not just about collecting the content, but as well
How do you know
foreseeing
what content to collect?
the evaluation phase and trying to imagine what needs to be done to evaluate.
Right. I mean, how much? I mean, most companies have huge quantities of content. How you can't test it all. It's simply a challenge of scale. So if you really want to know what you have, you start from the beginning, where all content, all successful content, in my mind, starts. And I think that Lief, as the content strategist, you can speak to what does that look like in other aspects, and how does that process apply in the use of that same content in an AI scenario?
Right. So it's really a question of, it's the basic business questions of what do we want or need this content to do? What are the metrics or goals that we want to achieve with it? We generally don't create content just for the fun of it. There's a purpose for that content. And in a new context, does it still make sense? How are we going? So what are the success metrics for the content in the context of a generative AI solution? So measuring that. So maybe it means success for this project, this generative AI project, is a certain number of support calls are deflected. Okay, great. We've now got a target.
Okay, but what do you mean by content, in fact, here? Are all content born equal? Do you mean that you can push anything inside this magic, whatever tech stack that has been built? Or do you think that some content are better suited, or some format, or what is the key driver in the success regarding the content itself? That's just any content will do as long as the knowledge is there, or do you feel that something more subtle has to be done? Or is there an age for example, structured content?
There's certainly, you can get there faster with a structured content because there's a lot of intelligence, a lot of business intelligence, a lot of semantics already baked into that work that the content pros have already done. There's a lot that can be done with some of the technologies that we said we weren't going to be spending a lot of time on today, the natural language processing that can infer intent out of unstructured content, but there's more work to be done there.
And you use the word infer, as opposed to, if you think about when let's say you're writing structured, modular, purpose-driven content, then there's no inference, right? It's very clear this piece of content was written for this purpose, and ideally there's metadata around it that would identify if there's any permissions, if there are any other contextual things, like it's for one operating system versus another, if there are, its purpose, is it a task versus a process versus a reference table? There's no inference if we have an architecture from the beginning and folks are writing content with the purpose, and that information around audience and in applicability in terms of subject classification, all of that can be applied in the architecture to the content. And but it starts with the content professionals creating purpose-driven content that can then be enhanced, augmented with this metadata that then can be passed through down to these other tools, so they don't have to rely on inferring, but that they can read that, and that way they can get more information around the context more quickly and with more certainty.
Okay, so you mean that I think I can fully agree with that metadata are key because they are bringing context, and that's typically where probably you can reduce the hallucination of the reply by making sure that the reply is using the content that applies to the situation, to the device, to the machine, to the version of the software you are working with, asking about. So I understand that.
And don't forget life cycle metadata. I mean, if you're an organization with a mature content set and mature products or services, you might have content that spans 10, 20 years of information. And that if someone asks a question and there isn't relevant date information on when the most recent version of something is, then it could be pulling information that is totally out of date if that content set wasn't curated, that there aren't the downstream tools aren't leveraging the combination of the context, the subject, the audience, and when is really important. And this is where, particularly when folks are doing version specific information about products, well, that we need to know what that was. Is it the version? Is it the right thing? But when did it change? Was it released and then there was an update? And if I think about your challenge that you mentioned, Lief, around reducing support calls, the folks in support, they know the questions that they get all the time. Most support organizations have really great software around giving analytics about the number of queries they get, the most common ones they get. And a lot of successful organizations have already been leveraging that data to have FAQs. Well, one of the questions you might think about is, do you need an FAQ? If or maybe the way to think about it is the FAQ a great place for you to start for what is the correct answer and what are the questions, and how do we map that to the people who ask them? Because the same question might be answered differently depending on the person's role. It's an internal versus an external person, their experience, what they're trying to accomplish. And again, to me, that maps right back to the content strategy.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so in the project you've been involved with, have you seen the need to create new metadata or specific metadata so that it increases the relevance, so say, of the GenAI thing? I don't know how to call that, this Jarvis thing that people want to build, or whatever, the chatbot, they call it a chatbot. Let's use that name as a generic whatever front end those companies want to build. So in this project, in the quest of the magic chatbot, the do-it-all that replies to any question automatically, so did you see the need to adapt the content further if the content was already structured, like in data, or did you see the need to add more metadata beyond the one that we're used for, more like faceted search in more like classical delivery, or is that enough? It's just that today it's not leveraged because usually people don't consider this structured content, or more needs to be done?
I'm pausing here because I'm immediately thinking about in order for the generative tool to be successful in the way that the boardroom folks think it ought to be, it requires that the technical, the user enablement content be connected to silos of other information that it hasn't previously been connected with. And that is almost certainly going to require some new metadata in place. And that might mean building out a further ontology or taxonomy stuff that needs to be added into the content to help feed other technologies that can help find the answer.
Okay.
I'm being coy about, knowledge graphs are going to be a very important part of a successful project at scale like that, and that is going to rely on metadata that almost certainly isn't in even structured content like data yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like you need an umbrella, more something that is encompassing all content and sort of reconnecting those different silos with a metadata layer on top, the existing metadata, to create this consistency across content silos. Okay, I see the point.
Yeah, and I do think, if we come back to, as the content professionals, how do we add value? If we step back and say, okay, we've gotten a really clear understanding of what success looks like. It might be a specific persona. It might be a specific segment of, the people you're trying to serve. It might be around those questions. Well, then how do we add value? Well, we start with, well, what content are you looking at? They shouldn't be just collecting random samples of content. We are the folks who know the content. And I said we, not just like, tech pubs, but marketing, training, service organizations. People who create content know their content. They know why they created it. They know who it's for. And when that definition of success is clear, then we can identify the appropriate content that is needed for those content sets. And I say sets intentionally because there's more than one. There's the source content set, there's the training content set, and being able to understand the purpose and why you might use one subset of your content versus another for these different purposes, getting the right questions. Again, the folks in tech support or the service organization are a great source for that information. And then working to collaboratively with folks or other content folks to say, how do we assess the quality of a response? And coming up with some shared understanding of what that means. And I honestly think you should be ready to find out that when you have content that's being aggregated across the organization, that there might not be agreement on what is the right answer, because if your content is being created in silos, perhaps the content is not in agreement. And so this actually might be a great exercise, not only for you to add value, but for you to make connections across the enterprise with other content professionals, and also for you guys to make sure that all your content is in sync and that you do agree on the right answer. And that, this is not something where you just give, but you also will get and you'll learn from this as well.
Okay, so I think we made you made both three good points. First, there's a role to play for content architects to help identify the content, because you know the value of the content, including life cycle, accuracy, relevance, applicability of content. So that's one. Then once the content is identified and so forth, you can help design additional metadata schemes that should be added to the silos content to make that something more consistent to feed these systems. That's two. And three, you can help downstream, helping evaluate, craft the methodology, the questions to evaluate the accuracy and the relevance of the model. Now, but I have a question for you, because there's something I've seen, and I take 2 minutes to explain why, because as you can imagine, we have added already GenAI into Fluid Topics. And so we are a delivery platform because we already have this capability to aggregate this content and create a unified repository. This knowledge graph that Lief is talking about is exactly what Fluid Topics does. So we don't know what content should be published into Fluid Topics. As you said, that's the role of content architects. But once you have identified this content, when you want to add those taxonomies, Fluid Topics is the tool for that. That's exactly what we do. Publish any sort of content, whether it's tech doc, past cases, wikis, knowledge bases, parts catalog, whatever you have, you can publish that into Fluid Topics, as long as experts like you can spot this content, identify the content, and publish that into Fluid Topics. There, we're good there. Downstream, okay, I agree with you that the key point is evaluating the accuracy, if content is missing or not. But what we have added in the platform as well, and you know that when you use generative AI, there's a way to use it, which is called RAG, Retrieval Augmented Generation, where basically you write prompts, because to trigger the LLM, regardless how you do it, whether you write a chatbot or whatever, you prompt the LLM. The way to make an LLM work is you talk to the LLM, so to say. So you write prompts. And we have prompt management inside Fluid Topics. Our customer can write their own prompt templates to make all that work. That's part of the. But what we see as well as a skill and as a need and something that is way more complex and subtle that one can imagine is prompt engineering, prompt writing. because it depends. I mean, see what I mean? It's like we can spot the content from the knowledge a user asks a question. We can spot the applicable knowledge. We can find it. We can say, okay, this is the part of the knowledge, the content that we have that is around this subject. But what to do with that subset of content that is the right content, clearly identified using the metadata, the context, everything. Imagine that you have the 3 pages or the 10 pages from 1 million pages, the 10 pages that is replying to the question. If you were a human and I would give you those 10 pages, you would read the pages, you would know the answer, okay? But what you want to do with the GenAI is instead of giving you 10 pages out of 1 million, you want GenAI to give you 10 lines or 10 words, okay? So that you don't have to read the 10 pages. That's the magic of what people want to achieve is don't give me the document, don't give me the pages. Give me the reply that's inside those 10 pages. And to go from those 10 pages to those 10 lines or 10 words, you need to prompt the LLM. And what we've seen is prompting is super cool, but super difficult. Well, super difficult because I'm an engineer. We are a tech company. We are a software vendor. We're a tech company. So the mindset that we have here is writing crazy good technology. But when it comes to being imaginative and writing the prompts, creative, I mean, my God, we are not the right profile for that. And we see that it requires some skills as well to write prompts. Is our tech writers the right people for that? Because you're used to write.
Oh, I think that they have, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, so Amber, I wanted to sort of just respond quickly to one thing that you said, and then Fabrice, I want to talk about, I have thoughts about what you just said. So Amber, you had really touched on the fact that in many ways, the challenge that content pros are going to have is that it's a political question because the information is in so many different silos that they need to pull into a generative solution. They need to partner with a number of different people across organization. And that is going to involve egos because this generative AI project is going to be a highly visible project and everybody wants their name at the top saying, it was mine, I led this thing, it's my success, and these other people were along for the ride. So there's absolutely a political aspect that will be a part of any of these GenAI projects, especially if the technology was initially set up, the pipes were connected, and it worked technically, but failed on the business objectives. So that's something where the content pros have an opportunity to come in, knowing that there's going to be potentially some fragile egos that need to be cared for. Fabrice, what you just talked about regarding the search and the prompt engineering really got me thinking about this idea that I've had for a while now, that your chatbot is not search. And a parallel to that is that, you know, the three of us have been around long enough that we learned way back in the infancy of the internet, we had to learn how to search. Like we had to learn how to use search engines the way search engines wanted us to use them. That meant we had to learn Boolean. we had to learn about Boolean, we had to learn about putting quotes around things, and slowly search engines got better. They got better about inferring our intent. That goes back to, hey, AI's been around for a long time in lots of different capabilities. We humans are now we're at the very beginning of that similar process of how to learn prompts. We're going to learn how to be better prompters of the LLMs through whatever the interface might be, chatbot in this case, to get the information that we think is in that repository. And so we're at the very nascent stage of how do we interact with these generative AI technologies. It won't be just a one and done as much as we would like it. We're going to have to do this iterative process, just like we learned with search. It failed, go back to the search, try again. Put quotes around it this time. Say exclude this because that's not information I'm looking for.
Ambiguous word, you know that this word is ambiguous, don't use it, use this word instead when you run the search on Google or whatever. I agree.
Yeah.
Amber, what's your thought on prompting?
I'm sorry?
What is your thought on prompting and the complexity and the opportunity of prompting as well for?
Well, I think that, first of all, there's this idea of a prompt engineer, and that is a role that pretty much people are defining as they want. And I think that with the word engineer on it, folks think that it's technically oriented, which to some degree, of course, you have to be able to work with the interface. But to me, again, it comes back to the content where it starts with, a good prompt is persona as a who am I? What's my context? Trying to do X. And again, I come back, if the content strategy is there and you've been writing your information this way, then you have a leg up on understanding what does context mean. And then for me, the challenge is, how do I translate what my understanding of context is into a series of prompts? Remember, it's not going to be just one, a series of prompts that gets me to that answer that we said, if this is the question and the answer for this user in this context is X, well, how do I back engineer those prompts to get that back through the content set that I know? I know where the answer is. How do I train the AI to get there? And that idea of applying the skills you already have to this new opportunity, I think, is one that a lot of content folks haven't realized. Or, to Lief's point, the fact that this could be, there's politics involved. Perhaps your management hasn't made the bid to get you in that room. And so, if that's the case, if there's an AI initiative happening in your company, the first thing, and I would say that in 80% of companies there is, there are a few that are very in risk-adverse industries, perhaps not, but in many industries, folks are looking at this all the way from the use case that Lief used to other ones that are not as Jarvis-y, so to speak. Your management needs to this needs to be a strategy. This is where your organizations, the content organizations, can really add value and help other parts of the company recognize the value that is in the content. And you, as an individual contributor, you may or may not be able to make the connections that you need to get into the room to be able to add value, but your managers should be going up their management chain and saying, okay, where are the AI initiatives, and being able to find out where, are they focused on a given domain, instead of a subject or domain where you guys have content. If so, there's an opportunity to have that conversation. And this is where, one of the other challenges, let's just be honest, is everybody's already busy, right? We're already swamped trying to get the work done that is on our plates right now. And so if you are going to be involved in this type of a project, it does need to come through management, because management needs to recognize that this is not we're going to have one meeting and you walk away, right? You don't add value just in the one meeting. That this would be something that needs to have your time allocated to it, and that this means it's a management decision around resources. And so, be prepared for that conversation, because you don't want to work for free, right? And you still have a lot of other, the rest of your work has not stopped just because this AI initiative is happening, unless you're in a very large company and they are literally dedicating people full time to this initiative, which is happening in some large organizations.
I think
I don't know if you want to speak to any of the other challenges that, I think we've made the case for you getting in there. Maybe we should talk a little bit about how to address the challenges of getting the content pros in the right room.
I think it's almost a conclusion to this discussion because we have 10 minutes left, and I'd like us to get some questions from the audience. If you have audience, please take advantage of having Lief and Amber here about this subject on how to go to reach out to those projects and how to get there and what needs to be done and go. I mean, okay. First question: how much time should we block to train a model and check the accuracy of the results? Is that a full-time job? I mean, how do you fit that? As you said, Amber, we are all very busy. So how do you fit that into what can you expect from the workload involved into this process? So that
I'm going to answer it the way any project manager would, which I'm not, but anybody who knows me knows, which is there has to be a really clear objective. And if you're in a technical environment, they might be doing this with an agile methodology, and maybe you can negotiate a certain amount of time per a sprint or something like this. But I think the how much time really depends on how well defined success is and how narrow the scope of content is that you're trying to leverage. Lief, any other thoughts?
Yeah, I want to jump in and add so data volume is going to be one aspect of what is going to affect how long the project would take. Accuracy standards would be another. And I think there's also there's a difference maybe that would be accepted for an internal audience that wouldn't be accepted for an external audience. So, all of those factors are going to feed into the question of how long is it going to take? And almost certainly it's going to take longer than you're given.
Yeah, exactly. They wanted it yesterday, so anytime you take is too long.
Okay. Do we have another question? Not yet. Don't be shy. Waiting for. Okay.
Yeah.
Good one. From Nelson, who says, who is doing this successfully currently, and how would success be defined? So, do you have examples of projects you've been involved in or monitoring or whatever, helping, and that have been successful in regard to this discussion that we have today? And how would you define success in that case?
Well, I can speak to the clients that I have seen do this successfully have not been lured by the shiny promise and have given it a lot of thought, have been very intentional, and again, looking at the strategy and saying, okay, what are we actually trying to achieve? And they are working, they have dedicated resources, quite honestly. Having dedicated resources, not a part-time project manager, a part-time taxonomist, no, they have dedicated resources. And I understand that that is not necessarily the reality for a lot of companies, but I do think that, as Lief mentioned, we're in a fairly nascent, the AI has been around a long time, but us interacting with it in this way is really new. And I would expect that over time, tools and strategies and support will be available so that maybe the time commitment won't be so great, but totally honest, dedicated resources is what's making the folks I work with successful.
And every generative AI project that I am aware of with the clients that we're working with, similar, it's a small team of a handful of dedicated, intelligent, wicked, smart, high-paid folks who get, shoved into a little research corner and said, go figure it out.
Okay, but obviously, if you're both involved in those projects, those projects have involved content experts as well. Otherwise, you wouldn't be part of that. So that's probably why you can put them as successful. Good. Jenny asks, how can you effectively check the accuracy of the model you trained? How can writers and content specialists participate? I mean, do you have, it's like you write the questions, you write, how do you do that? You type them and that you have a ranking mechanism probably, or maybe that's the question. See, what does it mean to check the accuracy? How would you do?
That's a great question, and it is going to be a slow, tedious process involving a human of asking, putting in the questions, and maybe the questions have come through the support channel. So you've got, a standard set of base questions that you would expect the language model to respond with accurately, but that means you, the human, enter the question as you might expect it would have come through the support. You read the result, and then you basically have to, bless it as approved. Then you modify the insert, the prompt, a little bit and see if you get the same response again. And you do this over and over and over until you have an accuracy standard that you had previously set met. It's
okay. So
a process.
Next question. We have 3 minutes left, 3 questions. So you have to be fast now, okay?
Okay, all right.
Janet asked, can there be hallucinations for the content that you serve up? Is technically verified and approved content from different content sets, training, support, marketing. Yeah, I guess that if you get all this content in one place, collected everything, does that guarantee you that you don't have hallucinations, or is it still going to be hallucinating?
I think it comes down to, things that I mentioned before, which is, if you have all the content, well, first of all, it might not all be in agreement. It might not say the same thing. It might not answer the question the same way because it was written by different people and maybe not reviewed the same rigor. And then relevancy, how, you get content from across the enterprise. Some of it's older and newer and it might not agree. So I don't think that you can make an assumption about accuracy and applicability. You're going to have to test it.
Okay.
Just very generically, let's talk about an automobile model that changes. The name stays the same, but the model versions are all different. You're going to need different answers based on the model, but that's probably not something that's being fed into the prompt by the asker, the questioner.
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about the content. The way you prompt the system as well leads to different answers, and maybe a way to reduce the hallucination is prompting in a better way. So that's where you need to learn, and you have this iterative and ramping up learning curve plus iterative way of doing by changing the prompt and see if one prompt is better or reducing hallucination. Simon is asking, can you recommend any specific resources for tech writers who want to learn more about setting up such models? We probably won't be setting things up, but we will need to advise the people who do on the content that goes in it. Resources, books, white papers, websites, blog posts, tools. Well, tools, free topics. Simon. Go for free topics. It's all in there. You just have to write the prompt, publish the content. So, but that's for the tools, the tool part. But for the methodology, more on the methodology side.
Well, the good news is that a lot of folks in our industry are starting to put out more information. I have to say, one of the most interesting and useful resources I had seen was a Bright Talk presentation by Lance Cummings back, I think, in August, that really demystified a lot of this. Lief, other resources that you can think of that's really helped us?
Our hosts today, CIDM, have a lot of great information. So, can certainly start there.
Well, there was an article just in the newsletter that came out this week that was excellent.
Exactly.
Okay, so go to the CIDM newsletters, guys.
Yes, definitely.
A question from Beth. Hi, Beth. Is it an advantage to have your content in data, including metadata?
I'm sorry?
I mean, is it an advantage to have your content in data, including metadata?
I think it is, because you have structure, you have modularity if you're actually using smaller units, and therefore the metadata granularity and detail will be provide more context for the smaller units. But I do think so I feel that takes out some of the risk with the inference that needs to happen with unstructured content. But I also think that you need to be prepared to have an aggregation, a heterogeneous source of content, not expect that you can rely on, for instance, the semantics in your data content, because your tools may or may not, if they're reading HTML, they're not reading maybe the native source, but if they're reading the HTML, maybe they lost, some of the semantic identification. So one of the things to look at is with your chat, your chat technology, what semantics can you retain from your original XML in the content that they're mining for the information?
Yeah, and I think I can reframe Beth's questions, because it's a customer using free topics, so I know their content a bit. Won't name, but they have metadata, they have Markdown as well. And I see a lot of companies that are now trying having a mixture of different content formats, part of that content in data, and instead of having everything in data, start having content in Markdown, or just lower semantic but still granular content, but lower semantic, that can be directly provided by subject matter experts, written by developers if you're talking about Markdown, but that could be restructured text or whatever similar, low semantics, still granular content set. So it's therefore would there be a difference using Markdown versus data, considering both are granular, or maybe difficult to assess for the moment? But that's a good question.
If the Markdown is going to be used there, depending on the version of Markdown that they're using, there's an opportunity to put information in metadata, and that could be used to influence the generative technologies.
Yeah, so it's not just one thing. I not surprisingly believe that there is value in having the structured content, but there is a dependency on what the technology actually can read. And I do think that as these tools evolve, that they will become more capable of leveraging more semantics as the tools mature. And then if that semantic information is there, well, then it can leverage it. If it's not there, it doesn't matter how smart the tool is if that data isn't there for it to use.
I can add to that, because I have another point on that. The semantics that you have in data has value, but it has value if you train a model. If you don't use your content for training model, you just do RAG, which is dynamically feeding the bot with this content. The semantic of your content, I mean, whether you have data or Markdown doesn't make that much of a difference. That would make a difference if you were fine-tuning or training a model, because then the semantic would be leveraged. For me, it's more that at that moment. But most of the project starts by using generic LLMs and trying to do RAG on generic LLMs, which is more prompting and having all the content and metadata. But the semantic of the structure itself has less value in that situation, but it has a lot of value if you start training, refining your model. I mean,
and Fabrice, way at the end of our conversation, you actually are raising a very important point, which is which language model is somebody going to be using?
That's for another day. No, we won't touch on that one. I have a last one for you, and then we stop.
That's a different webinar.
Because that's more like the tech side of it, but we can do one on the tech side of it. Last one, then we'll take from Jayori. We're asking topic-based meta authoring, content writing. Do you need to chunk? Oh, that's a good one. Assume that you have already granular content, data content. Okay, but do you need to chunk it further, like micro topics, to serve up GenAI touchpoints like chatbots? I mean, if you want to go to the chatbot direction, do you need to have small grains, or doesn't matter?
I have not seen the requirement to do so, but again, it's a great question. I don't know if folks have actually set up tests to to do, to test the efficiency of the system with a smaller, with micro content. But if you did go that route, again, making sure that the metadata got inherited by the smaller units so that they're not just strings that are going through without context is really important.
I would say, like, just like you, and even maybe the opposites, like too small grains are lacking context, and the problem that LLMs need context to avoid hallucinations. So I would even say the opposites, like, don't chunk it too small. Like 1 page is good. I mean, the classical 1 page size, about size, depending on your reuse strategy and stuff like that. But we can usually, rule of thumb, it's like usually half a page is topic size, can be 2 pages, 3 pages, depending on the procedure, whatever. But for me, it works well with LLMs. That's the right side. So the right size for content granularity as well. I agree with you.
In so many ways, it depends on the question itself. There's a size difference between the answer for what is the temperature right now versus how do I install the fluid topics. Very, very different amount of information necessary to answer both those questions.
Question from Ronnie, because it's not really a question. You talked about a reference from BrightTalk, a BrightTalk webinar. Was that you, Amber? Or you, Lief? Can you give? Do you remember the name, or what is the BrightTalk reference that you mentioned previously?
I can find it, and we can give it to. We can have it so it can go into the notes for the.
Amber, the person that you referenced, his name was Lance Cummings. He is a professor, I believe, in Alabama. So if this person were to search Lance Cummings webinar, and it's August, September timeframe, I want to say it was the middle of September, they'll find the talk. And honestly, I think you're right, it was on Bright Talk, but it could have been somewhere else.
Yeah, I mean, we watch a lot of these, and this is one of those things that we didn't all learn search on our own in a day. We're going to keep sharing information. We're going to share what we learn and what we know, and expect that if we were to have this conversation again in a year, this conversation might have a lot more specifics, because at that point we will have a lot more experience working with folks, and that, like I said, I think that there will be a level of maturity around how content is used by GenAI, as opposed to just focusing on which LLM or which piece of technology. I think that the process overall will mature, and we'll just all be part of that.
Okay, I think we're good. We passed the hour. Just have a remark from Mike, which I agree with. Like, micro content can be useful for knowledge graphs because it's more fine-grained and you have like fine nodes. But that's another subject as well, more on the tech side. Amber, Lief, thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
As you said, maybe we should do it in 6 months and another one in 1 year to see if we have the same reply to the same questions. Probably we'll have been through more projects, more success, more failures, more
hallucinations.
Then we'll know more what to do, and we'll be more specific probably about what we can do.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, audience. You can. Oh, sorry, I was one slide too late. Okay, these are our email address, websites. Feel free to reach out, contact us if you have any question, a project, whatever. We're here for that. That was a great pleasure to have this discussion with you. Hope to have another one soon.
I definitely enjoyed it. And Trish, thanks for having us.
Oh, absolutely. Just wanted to remind everyone that this and all past webinars will be posted on our CIDM website.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.